Hello there, I'm James. In this podcast, I look forward to explaining the development of the English language with a special look upon how different periods of history show the development of the English language. Today, we will start with the earliest development of the English language in its most primordial form. Expect Bronze Age warriors, wolf like behavior, and how there may have been prehistoric mass murder. Part 1 Indo-European Roots. To begin the talk about English language, we need to talk about its origins in the Proto-Indo-European culture. Indo-European is one of the world's largest language families, or sprachbunds, alongside language families like Finno-Ugric, Semitic, Austronesian, and Sino-Tibetan. It encompasses a vast array of languages, from Bengali to Swedish to Portuguese. I would like to make a very large disclaimer for this episode. Proto-Indo-European culture is very poorly understood. They have no written language, nor was there any written language around in their time. What we know about them comes from what many researchers have been able to make out of their descendant cultures. In roughly 4500 BCE, in the grassy steppe of what have now been Ukraine and southern Russia, a new culture emerged, called the Kurgan culture, after the stone burial mounds that house their dead. These steppe mans would become the genesis of the Indo-European cultures. They worshipped the sky god Dios Pitar, or Heavenly Father, or alternatively Perkounos, the one who strikes. Think of it as Zeus Pater in Greek, Dios Pita in Sanskrit, an ancient Indian language, Perkrunas in the Baltic languages of Lithuanian and Latin, and Perun for the Slavic languages, or even, back to Greek, Uranos. Ancient Proto-Indo-European languages followed a similar pattern of languages that descend from it. The general form of the statement in PIE, standing for Proto-Indo-European, is subject, object, verb, or SOV. Now, in a sentence, that would be, take for example, Brian hits the ball. Instead, if a Proto-Indo-European, if it was written in that model, it would instead be Brian the ball hits. This trait was not carried into the European branch of Proto-Indo-European, such as Germanic and Italian, but it survived in Persian and Indian languages, and Armenian decided to be difficult and used both ways of sentence structuring. This has caused a lot of claims from both researchers to argue whether it came in from Europe or through the Caucasus Mountains. The Proto-Indo-European peoples had many similarities in language and culture. In the mythology of the Indo-European cultures, they had a polytheistic pantheon led by the Sky King and his earthly wife. They ruled over a pantheon of the gods of the sun and the moon. These gods were known as Sehul, think of it as the Greek Sol, the Roman Solar, Surya, a solar deity in Hinduism, and the moon god Mehun. In Old English, Mohan, which then became moon. There was also likely a pair of divine twins or demigods that are either the direct children of the Sky Father or his favored men. Dios Sunhar, or the son of Dios, or son of the Father, the divine twins, tend to be seen as youthful adventurers and conquerors or wandering heroes, such as Hengist and Harsa, who began the Saxon invasion of what would now be England, Castor and Pollux in Greece, Romulus and Remus in Rome. I would like you to put a little check in for them, because their connotations with wolves will come back later. Lel and Polel in Poland, and Nakula and Sahadeva, early Hinduism. This is evidence of a wider social norm of young men being expected to leave the home around late adolescence and go travel the wider world, which is a common trend in folk tales and a social norm that still is somewhat carried over today. However, outside of deities, the Indo-Europeans had several cultural norms that have remained in the cultural psyche of their children. Their culture was pastoral, with tribes and clans being led by a reg, the origin of the term regal, or the Latin word rex, or the Latin word of kingdom, regnum, or in German, Reich, or in Hindi, Raj or Raja. Unlike many pastoral nomadic societies, they tended to be rather stratified, with strict castes of nobility. They had a common hatred of wolves, strangely, with the term wolf being synonymous with criminal, thief, and murderer. It is a common trope within these cultures of villains or outcast heroes being described as a wolf. In fact, the word wolf has been one of the most interesting studies of society and cultural connotations. Within the Proto-Indo-European Wilkos, meaning wolf, it would remain among its descendant languages as the Germanic Ulfaz, or the Hittite, a 4,000-year-old language from modern-day Turkey and Syria. The word was Walukulwaas, or in Sanskrit Virka for wolf. However, wolf could be a designation or title. Criminals could legally be declared as wolves, their humanity stripped of them, and as such illegal to kill. This is present in early Germanic stories, such as the Poetic Edda of Iceland, where two heroes literally become wolves while cast out from their families and clans for crimes. Hittite law codes, where the wolf had a double meaning, as both the animal and criminal or bandit, which would have lived like one. Wolves were despised in all Indo-European cultures, as, again, the Hittites had a word derived from Wulukos, wakua, literally meaning something bad, evil, or vile. Sanskrit word virkatat means savagery, while the word for safe, avrika, which then put through the Proto-Indo-European context, literally just means without wolves, which was to connotate something safe or happy. Some cultures were too terrified of wolves to even give them proper names, instead referring to wolves. Rather, Celtic and Armenians just refer to them based on their Proto-Indo-European word "wailos," meaning the howler. In Proto-Celtic, this would be orkos, and in Old Irish, ku, while Armenians, they called their wolves gael. Another cultural norm inspired by wolves was the Koryos, or warrior band. These bands consisted of young men who become outcasts and would travel and raid. This is not only a common trope of folk tales in all cultures, but a staple of the culture of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. These would be young men around 16 to 22 who would be cast out of their home in a coming-of-age ritual where they'd be given dark woolly cloaks. These bands would engage in what has been described by sociologists as wolf-like behavior, raiding, conquering, stealing cattle. Think of any heroic tale in most mythologies, and it could likely be traced back to the ancient tales of Kurios bands. The name Kurios can be found as a root word for many Proto-Indo-European derived languages, such as in the Old Persian tongue, roughly translating to around 600 BCE. Had the word kara, meaning people, in a connotation of an army or a traveling group, which survives in modern Persian as the word caravan, or traveling people. In ancient Greek, akioranos is a term for a military leader. Another interesting case of linguistics, as it's a mixture of two terms, the kurios, the warrior band, but the Greek suffix nos, to own. So if you mix them together, you get the owner of a kurios. In the Baltic languages, the word karas means war, while in Gallic, the word for army is kori. It is also noted among many early historians that it is likely many regions within Europe and the Middle East are likely named after the Koryos bands that would conquer them. Early Indo-Europeans would begin to spill south and westward. Archaeology shows that the early Yamnaya culture would split into Western and Eastern cultures, while the Western culture, known as the corded ware culture, would expand into Poland, Ukraine, Scandinavia, and northern Germany, while in the East, the Sinshasta culture would spread to Central Asia, eventually reaching India and Iran. These two branches of the Indo-European culture would become respective languages, known as Kentum and Satum. It should be noted that then, in the expansion of early Indo-Europeans, it is hotly debated how bloodthirsty this conflict was. Many believe that it could have constituted as a genocide, as genetic evidence shows that people living largely in Central and Western Europe show far more genetic similarities to those living in India, a good indicator that some form of mass murder has occurred or genetic replacement. However, others argue against this, stating there is little evidence of both great expansion in mythology, but also of mass graves which would have been common for a mass murder. There is, however, support of sort of a conquest, with many graves being shown of single men, likely early members of Curios, who would have conquered regions such as Germany, the Netherlands, France, and Italy. It is noted that a lot of the genocide comes from noted linguist Mareja Gimbutas from Lithuania. She is instrumental in understanding Proto-Indo-European studies, as she coined the Kurgan hypothesis for the genesis of Indo-Europeans within Russia, Poland, and Ukraine. However, a lot of her ideas have been put to the test earlier and now, as a lot of her ideas seem to be colored largely by her personal views and ideas such as 60s feminism, which are all good things. However, she has often been called out for biases and overlooking the facts, blaming early Indo-European culture for many of today's social ills rather than much evidence. Moving back to Centum and Satum, the name of these branches originated from both Classical Latin and Avestani, an ancient Persian language used for religious documents of the Zoroastrian faith. Now, Centum and Satum literally mean 100 in their respective languages. This is designed to show how the two languages and branches split, with the two forms being different pronunciations of what would be the same language. This is known as sound change or sound exchange. What is that? Well, to put it simply, think about how a language will, be used over time, how many new people will understand of it. Think of it this way. If you got in a time machine and walked up to Julius Caesar and just yelled his name at him, he would just look at you funny. This isn't only because you got out of a time machine into ancient Rome and yelled a random man's name, but also because that's not how we would have heard his name. Well, it is spelled the same way and uses the same script. In his time, his name would be pronounced Julius Caesar. Or in even more simple terms, think of it as how different regions pronounce different words. Though they're not languages, they still pronounce things differently, such as in Boston, you would pack the car. Or, in a different term, in the South, people say y'all. This is just as how language develops and evolves and new people understand it, people will develop accentation and sound change. Some of the biggest examples come from early Proto-Indo-European words, such as bear, to carry, which in English would mean bear, such as like, I am bearing this weight. In Latin, it is ferro or ferre, to carry. In Sanskrit, bahati, Iranian, barati, and Slavic, bejo, and in Baltic, berti, and in Celtic, biru. Another good example is berg, or bury, berg, such as town or fortification. Now in German, this is, of course, Berg. In Latin, fortus, meaning strong or powerful. In Sanskrit, Bharat or Bharant, tall and elevated. Brahman, which is growth, expansion, or development, or even a more religious term, outpouring of the heart. In Iranian, it's Braza, which means height. In Slavic, Brechu, hill, slope, or bank shore. Or in Celtic, Bri, Bre, Brega, Brigantes, Briginta, and Brigid. Well, in Armenian, they have Barjir. Another good example is Chista, or star. In English, it is, of course, star. In Old Gothic, it is sternindo. In Latin, stella. In ancient Greek, aster. In Sanskrit, stir. In Iranian, sartaram. And in Celtic, ser, seren. In Armenian, aslik. Another good idea is the word for light or brightness, luk, in Proto-Indo-European. In English, it is light, or in Old English, leoet. In Latin, it is lucera or lux, which is to shine and light, respectively. In ancient Greek, lukios, bright, shining, or white. In Sanskrit, rokait, in Iranian, rokaint, and in Slavic, luka. Another good idea is the word for time. Nu, which means now, which of course you can see in English, now. In Latin, nom, for now. Ancient Greek, nun. Sanskrit, nu. Iranian, nuun. And Slavic, nein, or ne. Another good word to use is the Proto-Indo-European word sem, together, or one, or united. In English, we have the term same, or in Old English, they also have the term sam, together. In Latin, semel, once, semper, always, simplex, single or simple, or singule, one, each, single. In ancient Greek, they had hes, hen, mia, or sem, and sim. In Sanskrit, they had the term sam, together, or sama, same, equal, or any. Ancient Iranian, or specifically Avestani, had hama, any or all. Slavic had samu, and Baltic had samka, or samsen, with or dividing. Celtic, they had oler, or samlith. At the same time, they also had hafal, or equal. The word for one, specifically the number, is oionus, or one in English. In Latin, they would pronounce it as unus, or un, becoming the root term of uno, on. While in Sanskrit, they had the term aika, or vartana, which means one, turn, or in ancient Mitanni-Aryan, aika, or eka. Avestani, they have eva, or yek. In Old Church Slavonic, the oldest form of written Slavic, they have inu. In Lithuanian, viernes. And in Old Irish, oen. When it comes to other good terms, the term crep, or body, became riff, or the term midriff for the middle part of your body. In Latin, corpus, and in Sanskrit, krp, or beautiful appearance or beauty, and Albanian, kurm, torso, and krep for the same term. For food and farming, another good term to use would be grain, in Proto-Indo-European being greno. In English, corn, or in Old English, corn meant grain. In Latin, granum, which of course means grain. In Sanskrit, germa, or jurna, old, worn out, and decayed. Slavic, they had zunra, or grain. And in the Old Prussian dialect, something similar to Lithuanian and Latvian, zirni, and in Lithuanian zirnis, or for pea. Celtic, they had olar and wigran. Now, if you're smart, I bet you could detect which languages were Kentum and which languages were Sadum. And if you did, go pat yourself on the back if you think you got it. Now, were you able to detect the similarities between Slavic, Baltic, Indian, and Iranian, and the similarities between Germanic, Celtic, Italic, and Albanian? If so, pat yourself on the back. That was difficult. But you can see how the languages had split and the sounds would begin to change or become more similar with each other. No, as the language would develop, it would travel farther west, corresponding with the Fullenbeger culture of South Scandinavia and northern Germany, and parts of East and West Poland. This culture would mix with and develop with the indigenous culture, creating one of the earliest forms of Germanic language, and thus some of the earliest forms of the roots of English. This is where I want to leave you here right now, as the study of Proto-Indo-European and the context of English has largely been discussed. Next episode, I will be talking about early Germanic, and finally be able to talk about actual written documents, not just what can largely be described as speculation. I would like to thank you for listening. I'd like to thank you for staying here. If there's anything I need to change or fix, please write so in the comments. I really want to know. Thank you for your time, and have an amazing day.